Can you imagine being called more dangerous than 1,000 rioters? Seriously, that's what the police said about Lucy Parsons, one of the most fiery, influential, and honestly overlooked revolutionaries in American history. But behind that public firebrand, there's this incredible personal riddle, one that makes you question everything you think you know about identity.
And boom, this slide gets right to the heart of the mystery. On one side, you have the identity Lucy Parsons built for herself. Lucy Gonzalez, a woman of Mexican and indigenous heritage, born free in Texas. But then, you look at the historical record and it tells a totally different story. Lucia Carter, an African-American woman born into slavery in Virginia. So, how on earth do you square these two realities?
So here's how we're going to tackle this. We're going to break it down into 4 parts. First, we'll look at her powerful public image, this goddess of anarchy. Then, the one event that turned her into a national figure. After that, we'll start peeling back the layers of that carefully constructed identity. And finally, we'll get into her really complicated legacy. Okay, let's start with who she was to the public. That quote, "more dangerous than 1,000 rioters," came from the Chicago Police Department. And they weren't kidding. She was an absolute force of nature, a brilliant writer and speaker who built up this fearsome reputation as the goddess of anarchy. You know, this quote just nails her whole philosophy. She had absolutely zero faith in the political system. To her, voting was just a trick, a delusion. She believed the only way working people were ever going to see real change was through direct action, through revolution, not casting a ballot. And she was not subtle about what direct action looked like. In this notorious article she wrote called To Tramps, she literally told unemployed people to go get revenge on their old bosses. And she ended it with the line, "learn the use of explosives." I mean, right there you can see why the authorities thought she was such a firebrand. She was openly calling for violence. So her reputation in Chicago was already huge. But something was about to happen that would launch her onto the national stage. The Haymarket Affair of 1886. This was the moment that transformed Lucy Parsons from a local radical into a symbol for the entire anarchist movement. All right, so here's the quick and dirty breakdown. It all kicks off with a massive strike for an 8-hour workday. Then, during a protest rally, someone, and to this day nobody knows who, throws a bomb. Chaos erupts. And in the trial that followed, Lucy's husband Albert Parsons, who is a big-name anarchist himself, gets convicted along with 7 others. Not for throwing the bomb, mind you, but for conspiracy, basically for their radical ideas. 4 of them, including Albert, were hanged. Just as the trapdoor opened, Albert Parsons shouted his last words, "Let the voice of the people be heard." It instantly became this legendary rallying cry for the labor movement. But for Lucy, it became the cornerstone of her new identity. And just like that, everything changed. After Albert's execution, she wasn't just Lucy Parsons the activist anymore. She became the Haymarket Widow. She started touring the country, using her husband's martyrdom as this incredibly powerful platform to condemn the government and spread the anarchist message. This is what cemented her place as a national figure. But behind this powerful public figure, there was still that riddle we started with. So now, it's time to peel back that public persona and really dig into the meticulously crafted identity she lived under. I mean, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Why would someone so committed to a cause that's all about truth and justice for the little guy build her entire life on a fundamental lie about who she was and where she came from? Well, here are the facts that historians have pieced together. She was born Lucia Carter in Virginia. Her mother, Charlotte, was an enslaved woman. Her father was almost certainly the white man who enslaved them. And during the Civil War, they were all forcibly moved to Texas, likely to keep them from being freed by the Union Army. This was the past she was so desperate to erase. And the reason really comes down to one word: survival. Think about it. This is Texas right after the Civil War. The backlash against Reconstruction is incredibly violent. Interracial marriage was outlawed right after she and Albert, a white former Confederate soldier by the way, got married. Living openly as an interracial couple was just plain dangerous. So creating this new, exotic identity as a Mexican and indigenous woman, well, it wasn't just a preference, it was a shield. And look at the lengths she went to. This wasn't a simple one-time name change. She used a whole bunch of different names over the years. Gonzalez was the one that stuck, but she also used Diaz, Del Gaither, and others. Every single name was another brick in the walls she was building around her true past. Okay, so this brings us to our final section, trying to make sense of the legacy of this incredibly contradictory woman.
She was a revolutionary, for sure, but she was also so much more complicated than that.
This table really just lays it all out, and it's kind of mind-blowing. The same woman who advocated for dynamite also presented herself as this prim and proper Victorian mother. She co-founded the super-radical IWW union, but she was against women's right to vote. She fought tooth and nail for the white working class, but, and this is a huge tragic irony, she almost completely ignored the specific struggles of African Americans. And her sharp edges weren't just for the capitalists. She clashed very famously with other major anarchists, especially Emma Goldman. Goldman was a huge champion of free love, but Lucy, despite her own private life being pretty liberated, publicly condemned it. She always stuck to that more conventional image of the family. And her ideological rigidity had absolutely heartbreaking personal costs. When her son, Albert Jr., decided to enlist in the U.S. Army, she saw it as the ultimate betrayal of everything she stood for. So she had him committed to a mental institution. He stayed there for 20 years, until he died in 1919. And there's no evidence she ever visited him.
So at the end of the day, Lucy Parsons is still an enigma. She spent her entire life fighting against systems that try to define and confine people. But in the process, she ended up defying not just the boxes history built for her, based on race and gender, but even the one that she so carefully built for herself.
And that really leaves us with this final tough question. When you're born into a world that is designed to oppress you, is reinventing yourself the ultimate act of revolutionary survival? Or is it a betrayal of the very people you came from? With Lucy Parsons, there is no simple answer.